Hey guys, hope you're well. It's Solomik here with DNB Academy, and today I want to look at 3 of the biggest issues for me when I'm receiving demos. So we'll take a look at those things, and then I'll look at how you can break out of that a little bit as well. So the first thing for me is having poor variation in your arrangement. So you've got a great idea, you've sketched it out to 4 minutes, whatever, and everything fits into 16 bar sections, and it DJ's fine and everything, but it's just not interesting to listen to, right? You've got a drop that plays for 64 bars and changes maybe once, and you kind of don't really know what to do to get out of that. You don't know how you can make it any more interesting. So there's a few different things you can do. The first is that I tend to make sure that I've always got a rough idea of my arrangement in my head. So I'm not just writing and being like, oh, it sounds boring now, I need to change it, because you can lose perspective of that as you're working on a tune for sometimes weeks and months and whatever. Sometimes I'll do this mentally, and sometimes I'll have a physical arrangement at the top. You can see that I've done a video on arrangement for Drum Bass Academy, so you can check that video out if you're not sure. But when you've got these kind of sketches, how do you keep it interesting? So there's a couple of things you can do. One is to make sure that you've always, every 16 bars, there's some kind of change. You add a new instrument, you take some stuff away. Sometimes having less is as exciting as adding more. We've got some examples here. So I've got my tune All or Nothing, which came out on UKF recently. And I'll give you a little play, and then we'll look at how I varied it throughout.
Something that once was, and I ain't gonna change my mind. And maybe this is not our time, but I'm not scared to be alone. And I will never lie to you. I'm always gonna...
So you get the idea. So step one is you can see that for the first 16 bars of the drop, we've got this falling note idea here, and that's pretty much the only instrument that's playing. We've got some piano-y bits, like reverses and stuff here, but that's it. The second 16, as that comes in, which is broken up by a drum fill or a drum break here, is that I bring in an ARP. We've got this pad sound, and I add some keys in as well. There's also big leaps in the vocal, in that we've got big vocals here, and then we have this kind of much more subdued vocal for a 16. But if you're working without vocal, then kind of don't worry too much about that. If you are working with vocal, just make sure it's not like 100% stacked with harmonies playing the whole time. Have very distinct sections. But the other one is that we've got a bunch of different atmospheres and stuff that come in. So for this one here, we've got these 2 atmosphere layers, and then we've got some more again in the second, and then the third part of the drop, and so for the third part of the drop, I've actually taken those out. We've got all of our impacts and everything as normal, kind of adding some kind of interest in keeping things moving, but I've taken that layer out. I've also added to the drums another little shuffle, just to subtly keep it moving. The other thing then is that when it comes to the second drop, I've completely varied up the bass line. So the musical stuff stays the same. Arrangement wise, we've got some different harmonies in the vocal.
Someone that once felt so present, I have left behind. And I ain't gonna change my mind. And maybe this is not our time, but I'm not scared to be alone. And I
So
will
we've got
never
that like little ad-libby vocal over the top. But we've also got a new bass line.
and maybe this is not our time, but I'm not scared. Scared to be alone. And I will never lie to you. I'm always gonna speak my truth.
Just with a few more different ghost notes in it to keep that part of it interesting. It's not got to be a lot, but you've got to have enough that you notice that something's changing as it goes and you're not like completely zoning out, essentially. You've not got to reinvent the wheel. I mean, that's another thing, is that sometimes I get sent stuff where it varies too much and there's nothing for me to like gravitate and kind of catch on to. So be aware of both. Number 2 is drum arrangement, like poor drum balancing, poor drum arrangement. What do I mean by that? Well, as you can see here on my drums, if we ignore this kind of kick build-up drum, I've got my kick, my snare, and my tops. Everything is grouped. I've done a video on why we use grouping and kind of drum balancing and grouping stuff that way. So you can check that out. But what this allows me to do is to look at my drums as a whole and make fairly sweeping changes to, do my tops need to come down, does my snare need to come down, does my kick need to come down. So having everything really well organized, having loud enough ghost hits, that's one that I miss a lot, is that people will have like a really loud kick and snare and then very washy tops, and it kind of doesn't feel like it's gelled. And you'd be able to see that here, right? If I have my kick and snare are peaking really high and my tops are like way down here, you might find that they don't always have to be equal. They're fairly kind of even here. Use your own judgment there, but having it so that everything is simplified and grouped and labeled so that you can make those edits and make those changes and visually see how everything's hitting relative to each other will make your life way easier. The other is just making sure that stuff doesn't line up. It doesn't always sit on the grid, but does line up. So I've got a shuffle here, for example. And you can see there's some gaps in the break here that where I've cut the snare and moved it. And it doesn't sound overly silent, but what I've done, in fact, you can actually see it here where I've not bounced it. I'm just making sure that all my ghost hits all line up together. All my kicks all line up together, and so that the groove of each break and each shaker that I have layered in my tune is feeling cohesive, rather than them all fighting and feeling like then they're off. If I have, this ghost hit hitting on the beat here, it's going to feel almost like a weird flamming effect where I've got two snares like right off to each other. It's just going to sound horrible, basically. And you'll want to do that for all your shakers, all your hats, everything. Line them up. Doesn't have to be on grid. This one isn't. It's actually slightly off to give it a bit more groove. But they do have to be consistent. And the third and final one is a poor understanding of how sound design and mixing work together. So if I'm mixing a tune, and you'll all probably have done this, you're aware that every sound has to sit in its own frequency spectrum. I've got a sub, and so I'll need to high pass my piano, for example, if that sits over a sub. I've got my drums, and I need to sidechain the bass to the kick, or at least kind of phase align them or EQ them so that they're not clashing and fighting. Everyone's kind of aware of these things, but when it comes to sound design, you can make that work in your favor. For example, if I've got my bass is in here, I've got 2 layers on my bass now on this tune. And then we've got this mid layer. And the 2 of them are stacked in a way where they're not fighting, but I've got control over the sub, the real low end, and then the kind of mid layer in my tune. So anything from sort of 100 to 200 hertz, maybe 300, I've got a separate kind of control for. If you're missing something in 300, 400 hertz, maybe a low pad might work. If you've got some top end that feels like it's lacking, maybe some shakers in your drums might elevate that. But selective sound design and sample choice to fill gaps in your frequency range, rather than you creating a bunch of sounds and then cramming them into that space, will make your life 1,000 times easier, and as a result the tune will sound better. So there you go. There are my top 3 things that I think that new producers struggle with, and when I get sent tunes, they're the ones that separate the professional sounding stuff from the more amateur sounding tunes. I hope that helps. Any questions, let us know, and I'll see you in the next one.